Hello and welcome back to another video. In this series of videos we'll be taking a look at some of the maps that have been forgotten from CSGO's history. We'll be looking at some of the community made maps that never got the recognition they deserved, and some of the maps that have been left behind as the game has evolved. For many games, the main variable is the heroes, the characters, the weapons, the skills and abilities. But for CSGO, I'd argue it's the maps. Sure, the weapons are important, but the main art of the game is how you and your team utilise strategy on the various game boards available. In recent years, one of the maps that could certainly be given the title of being left behind is Cobble. Since its last set of major changes in the Halloween update of 2018, Cobble has been left in limbo. Before these changes, Cobble's layout was already quite divisive, yet after the divisions remained, just with different people on each side of the fence. Post its Halloween makeover, Cobble's brightened up a bit, but its prospects remain dull as it sits in the reserve pool awaiting its fate. It's been taken out of the active duty pool for a while now, and there's plenty of players who'd like to see it make a triumphant return. The problems with Cobble are really hard to pin down. Different people see different issues with the map. There's a lot of talk from people who just want the map to be reverted to its original state before the Halloween update. This version of the map appears to still have its fans. However, before it was removed from the competitive rotation, there were plenty of players who weren't happy with the map in this state. The map was being accused of being quite stale competitively, and that it was mainly being kept in to draw in viewers who were only really there to try and get a sweet Dragon Lore drop. Interestingly, when the map was updated, there were quite a few people who praised the changes, yet despite the initial praise from the community, nothing much came of the updated Cobble. It was like the map was immediately forgotten and abandoned by both Valve and the community. The 2018 version of Cobble was never put through its paces like the previous version. From what I remember playing it back then, the changes made the map feel even more CT-sided in some ways, and the gameplay on Bombsite A just didn't feel right. Visually, the map was brighter than ever, which made the environment pleasant. But the map also looked more cobbled together than ever. Cobble's now been relegated to the casual map pool. I mean, it's still in the game, but it's basically a fate worse than death for the map. Like many of the other maps that have lost their footing in the community, there have been a few fan-made recreations that look to mix up the gameplay and try to find ways to make the map more interesting to play. Cobble's always had a bit of an identity crisis. It contains a lot of defining features that were clearly added to make the map more fun to mess around on, but they don't really translate into making a fair competitive arena. As Cobble evolved over the years, many of these fun features were stripped back. But I don't think that's really been the map's downfall. In fact, many of the updates Cobble has seen have helped make the map more enjoyable to play. I just wonder if Valve's been a bit too conservative with some changes and too liberal with others, without making enough adjustments and tweaks to these changes to find that little sweet spot in the middle. Perhaps the real problem with Cobble is that enough time just hasn't been given to iron out its problems. It's clear that when Valve were remaking the map all the way back in 2014, they weren't too sure on what kind of direction they wanted to take the map in either. There's plenty of additional abandoned props that made their way into the SDK, which suggests instead of a French chateau, Cobble was instead to take place in a King Arthur themed fate. There's no way to tell how these props would be included into the map, but judging by the fact that they're player scale, we can infer that they were probably experimenting with some very different bombsite layouts. As a classic map, Cobble certainly has one of the simpler layouts. What Valve did to bring the map up to CSGO's standards was a triumph in a way. There's a lot to be said for what they managed to achieve. When I think of Cobble, there are three main timeless features that feature in every iteration of the map. The first are the sniper's nests. These have been featured in every iteration of the game, but have been heavily stripped back in CSGO. In a way it's a shame, it's a pretty iconic location of the map, but at the same time, integrating this feature in a way that enables the map to remain a competitive contender was always going to be tricky. The second are the two large ramps that link CT spawn to the rest of the map. Since the map's conception, these have largely remained the same. Whilst they certainly give the high ground owners an advantage, this has been compensated for quite well. The third is the courtyard, which, at least in CSGO, has evolved into being less of a battleground and more of a staging ground. Each of these elements are really the hallmarks of Cobble, and other than the sniper towers, thankfully haven't really been the source of the map's woes. Even with all its problems, I still think the layout is salvageable, and Cobble could still be returned to its former glory. So long as at least one or two of these hallmarks remain, the rest of the map, as we've seen already, is fair game for a total redesign. I don't really think anyone's really qualified to know exactly which parts of the map need redesigning. There are certainly some things I'd like to see changed or re-added, but these things are going to be very subjective, and knowing how split the community's been on the map, there's no magic change that will please everyone. I think there are three potential solutions that could help bring Cobble back from the dead. Either Valve need to restore much of the map that was cut, reintegrate many of the elements that made the map so memorable, and embrace its role as a fun map for casual and scrimmage modes. Valve throw the map into the deep end and adjust. Or they need to pull a Vertigo and totally redesign all the non-Cobble elements from the ground up and build it with the community via Wingman or even the new retakes mode from the get-go. What Valve achieved in turning Vertigo and Overpass into the beloved competitive maps that we see today is quite something, especially considering their origins. Overpass's experimental design seemed unsalvageable from the get-go, yet now it's one of the most popular maps in the game. And Vertigo is considered a joke by many in the community, a map purely for getting into wild matchmaking games completely skewing the ranking system. What really got Overpass and Vertigo up to the standard they are today was their inclusion in the competitive scene, while still in a pretty rough state, so they could receive the rigorous testing and community discussion needed around these maps. It's pretty clear that the talent is there to do the same to Cobble if they so desired. Yet maybe that's not their aim with Cobble. Canal seemed to have suffered a similar fate, a map that I'd also like to make a video about. It received a massive number of updates and overhauls to the layout to make it more viable, yet equally has been left waiting in limbo. Whilst Cobble is still beloved by many, and certainly hasn't been truly forgotten, it's now in a place where it's waiting on Valve to make the next move. Either the map will have to be put through its paces in a competitive environment, be given the Vertigo treatment, or sadly it may face the axe. At the moment it doesn't seem like Cobble is in a good place, either as a competitive or as a casual map.